belong to the First Order, and will remember this as the last day.
What happens to the family of the most infamous man in history? When the world remembers Adolf Hitler, it rarely asks, what became of the people who shared his blood? It began in the final days of World War II. As Berlin burned and the Third Reich crumbled, Adolf Hitler, the architect of a global catastrophe, took his own life in a bunker beneath the city. The 1,000-year empire he promised collapsed into ash within 12 years. In that instant, one of history's most infamous men vanished into death. But his name did not. The world moved on, but what of those left behind? On June 1st, 1960, in a quiet Bavarian farmhouse, Paula Hitler, the last surviving member of Adolf Hitler's immediate family, died in solitude. With her passing, the Hitler bloodline slipped quietly into obscurity. She was the only sibling to carry the family name to the end. Her brother left no children. The rest, half-siblings, nieces, nephews, either vanished into new identities or chose lives of deliberate silence. But their stories did not end with the war. Some struggled under the crushing weight of a name history cursed. Others rejected it entirely, changing identities to escape its shadow. None sought fame, fortune, or power. Instead, they lived quietly, anonymously, some even making an unspoken pact never to have children, ensuring that the bloodline would die with them. This is the untold story of a family erased, not by war, but by shame. A lineage not exterminated, but extinguished by choice. Adolf Hitler famously obsessed over racial purity and the idea of perfect bloodlines, yet ironically, he left behind no descendants. His mother, Clara Hitler, died in 1907. Of his siblings, only 2 lived into adulthood: his half-sister Angela, born in 1883, and his full sister Paula, born in 1896. Neither of them married or had children with Adolf, and as historian Anton Joachimsthaler observed, Paula was the last member of the family still bearing the Hitler surname. Family life in the Hitler household was far from harmonious. Even in his youth, Adolf's relationships were marked by cruelty and tension. According to Paula, one of her earliest memories was of being struck by her brother. At just 8 years old, she said bitterly, "Once again I feel my brother's loose hand across my face." The household was dominated by their strict, often abusive father, and those early scars ran deep. By the time the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, only Angela and Paula were still alive. Their connection to Adolf became a lifelong burden, one they never fully escaped. Hitler's immediate family. Paula Hitler. Of the 2 surviving siblings, it was Paula Hitler, the youngest and Adolf's only full sister, who would carry the family name into the fractured post-war years. But like the rest of the Hitler bloodline, her story would unfold not in prominence or redemption, but in retreat, denial, and gradual erasure. In her earliest years, Paula lived in the long shadow of a turbulent household. Born in 1896, she grew up alongside Adolf under the tyrannical rule of their father, Alois, a man infamous for his volatile temper. Their mother, Clara, offered some measure of warmth, but the home was cold, strict, and filled with fear. Paula's childhood recollections would later hint at both psychological and physical abuse, not just from her father, but occasionally from her older brother as well. "Once again I feel my brother's loose hand across my face," she once said, recalling a moment when she was only 8 years old. The sentiment lingered, a mixture of pain, betrayal, and resignation. As Adolf climbed the ranks of political power, Paula kept her distance. She rarely saw him during the 1930s and played no known role in the Nazi regime. She worked quietly as a secretary in a Vienna insurance office, living under the radar. But even there, the weight of her last name followed her. When her employer discovered her true identity, she was promptly fired, proof that even anonymity was fragile when your surname was Hitler. Adolf occasionally sent money to support her. Once in 1939, Paula visited him at the Berghof, his mountain fortress in the Bavarian Alps. The visit was brief and stiff. According to later accounts, Paula found the atmosphere there deeply uncomfortable, full of tension, arrogance, and sycophants. She was an outsider among insiders, tolerated more than welcomed. She returned to Vienna and withdrew again into her quiet, solitary life. When the war ended in 1945, her world was thrown into chaos. Allied forces found her in hiding and detained her on May 26th. The interrogation was intense. US intelligence agents were convinced she might know something, anything, about her brother's crimes or about the inner workings of the Third Reich. But Paula denied it all. She claimed total ignorance of the atrocities. "I only knew what the papers said," she told them, and insisted she had lived in the depths of the countryside, isolated from events. No evidence surfaced to implicate her, and she was released. But freedom came with no dignity. She was penniless, jobless, and forever tainted by the name she bore. For a time, she lived off meager state support and what little remained of her inheritance. In 1952, she returned to the area near Berchtesgaden, where her brother had once played host to world leaders and tried to vanish. She adopted a false name, Paula Wolf, a simple alias, yet deeply unsettling. Wolf had been Adolf's own favored pseudonym for years. Whether this choice was ironic, nostalgic, or subconscious is unknown. Her new home was modest, a small rental, quiet, tucked away. There were whispers that former SS men, once loyal to Adolf, kept watch over her from a distance. Some say they helped her with errands, others that they merely stood guard, shielding the last Hitler from the prying eyes of the world. Regardless, Paula lived in profound solitude. She avoided the press and politics, never wrote a memoir, and remained silent about her infamous brother until 1959. That year, she gave a rare interview for a British television documentary. It was her only public appearance, and it left viewers disturbed. She offered vague childhood memories, but when asked directly about the Holocaust, she claimed to know nothing of it. She did not condemn Adolf. She did not mourn the victims. She simply repeated what she had always said, that she had been far removed from everything. "I knew nothing," she insisted, even as the world cried out for acknowledgement. A year later, on June 1st, 1960, Paula died alone of a heart attack. She was 64. There was no funeral of note, no mourning relatives. She was buried in a simple grave in Berchtesgaden, marked plainly with her real name, Paula Hitler. But history did not let even that remain. In 2005, her remains were quietly exhumed and reburied under a new, anonymous headstone. Her identity, like her legacy, was scrubbed clean. Paula Hitler lived a life suspended between victimhood and complicity, silence and survival. She bore no children, wrote no testimony, and left no lasting trace. By the time the dirt settled on her unmarked grave, the bloodline that had spawned one of history's greatest monsters had come to its final quiet end, not with reckoning, but with disappearance. Angela, Adolf Hitler, elder, half-sister. But Paula wasn't the only sister to pass quietly into the margins of history. There was also Angela, Adolf's elder half-sister, whose life followed a different, more entangled course with her brother's rise and fall. Born in 1883, Angela Hitler entered adulthood long before Adolf's political ascent, and unlike Paula, she became deeply embedded in his private world during the 1920s. A devout Catholic and widowed mother of 3, she was practical, firm, and fiercely protective of her children. When Adolf's fame began to grow in the early years of the Nazi movement, it was Angela he called upon to manage his household. She became his housekeeper in Munich and later moved with him to his remote mountain retreat at the Berghof. For a time, Angela was one of the very few people, especially women, whom Hitler truly trusted. She oversaw his meals, his staff, and the daily rhythm of his secluded life in the Alps. She was not merely a housekeeper, she was a gatekeeper. And as such, she had opinions, strong ones. It was here that the rift between them would begin. Angela took an instant dislike to Eva Braun, the young, camera-loving companion who appeared increasingly often in Adolf's inner circle. To Angela, a devout and disciplined matriarch, Eva was everything wrong with her brother's new world, frivolous, inappropriate, unworthy of the man she still saw as a misunderstood genius. The friction grew over time, and Angela's position became increasingly precarious. In February 1936, she took a quiet but defiant step. Without her half-brother's approval, she married her longtime partner, architect Dr. Martin Hamitsch, in a small ceremony held in Braunau am Inn, Adolf's birthplace. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. He was livid. From that moment on, Hitler all but erased her. He never again referred to her by her maiden name, calling her only Frau Hamitsch, as though she had been cut clean from the Hitler bloodline. In his memoirs and correspondence, she all but disappears. To the public eye, she had simply ceased to exist. Yet blood, it seems, retained some hold. As the war drew to a devastating close and the cities of Germany burned under Allied fire, Adolf did something unexpected. After the firebombing of Dresden, where Angela and her family lived, he ordered that she and her children be evacuated to safety. They were brought under SS guard to Berchtesgaden, the very mountain home from which she had once been exiled. It was a strange, full circle filled with silence and ghosts. In addition to this final gesture of protection, Hitler authorized financial support for Angela. His personal accounts sent her family over 100,000 Reichsmarks, and his will provided for her a generous pension of 1,000 Reichsmarks per month. It was an extraordinary sum at a time when the Nazi state was collapsing into rubble. Whether Angela ever received a penalty for it after his death is unknown. After the war, Angela quietly disappeared into the ruins of the country her brother had destroyed. She settled in Hanover, far from the mountain villas and the corridors of power she once knew. There, she lived simply. For a time, she even ran a small business. There were no interviews, no memoirs, no public statements, only faint mentions in Allied records and a scattering of testimony from those who had once known her. But even in her final years, Angela never condemned her brother. In one of her last recorded statements, she insisted that neither she nor Adolf had known anything about mass murder or the Holocaust. "I heard only what others heard," she claimed. It was a refrain common among those once close to the regime. Whether she was lying, deluded, or simply clinging to a safer narrative, no one can say for sure. On October 30th, 1949, Angela Hitler, now Frau Hamitsch, died of a stroke at the age of 66. She left no memoir, no public reckoning, and no children who bore the Hitler name. Her death, like Paula's, passed quietly, noted only in passing by a world trying to move on. And just like that, another branch of the Hitler family tree withered and fell, leaving behind no legacy, only silence. Extended family. But Hitler's immediate family wasn't the only one to quietly fade from the world stage. The shadow of his name extended to more distant branches, relatives who lived at the margins of his life, yet were forever tethered to it. Some tried to embrace his legacy, others fled it. In the end, all shared the same fate: extinction, obscurity, or erasure. Alois Hitler Jr. The most senior of these relatives was Alois Hitler Jr., Adolf's elder half-brother, born in 1882 from their father's first marriage. 23 years older than Adolf, Alois Jr. had grown up under the same tyrannical father, Alois Sr., but had little warmth left for his younger sibling. The two brothers' early years were marked by rivalry and resentment. Alois later recalled a childhood where he was beaten for mischief, while Adolf's antics were excused as cleverness. By his early 20s, Alois Jr. had grown restless and rebellious. He was a drifter, moving from job to job across Europe, eventually landing in Dublin and then London, where he married an Irish woman named Bridget Dowling. In 1911, they had a son, William Patrick Hitler. But Alois soon abandoned the family and returned to Germany without Bridget or the child, leaving behind a trail of minor scandals and petty fraud. His return to the Reich did not bring redemption. By the late 1930s, Alois was living in Berlin and running a small bakery cafe known as Café Alois, of all things. Ironically, this unassuming establishment became a hangout spot for SA stormtroopers, men loyal to the very regime ruled by his estranged half-brother. Yet despite the shared blood and shared name, Adolf Hitler offered Alois Jr. no favor, no recognition. In Mein Kampf, Adolf made no mention of his half-brother at all, a conspicuous omission. Alois remarried bigamously to a woman named Hedwig Friedel and had a second son, Heinz. Still, he remained a peripheral figure. After the war, when the Third Reich collapsed and its leaders were hunted, Alois Jr. quietly vanished. He changed his name to Alois Hiller and settled in Hamburg. There, he lived in obscurity, untouched by post-war trials or press, raising his family behind closed curtains. He died of natural causes on May 20th, 1956, largely forgotten. His grave in Ohlsdorf Cemetery, unvisited and unmarked for decades, was eventually reclaimed by nature, just another lost plot in the long cemetery of history. William Patrick Hitler. But the most notorious of Hitler's extended kin was undoubtedly Alois Jr.'s first son, William Patrick Hitler. Born in 1911 in Liverpool, William grew up under the shadow of a surname that, for a time, opened doors. In the 1930s, as his uncle rose to power, William moved to Germany to seek fortune under the Nazi banner. He believed the Hitler name would secure him a career, perhaps a position within the regime. He was wrong. Adolf despised his nephew's opportunism and was said to have berated him publicly. The relationship soured fast. Denied status and increasingly disillusioned, William made a stunning break. In 1939, he gave an explosive interview to Look magazine titled "Why I Hate My Uncle." In it, William portrayed Adolf as petty, cruel, and cold, even recalling how the future Führer would strike flowers with a whip in fits of rage. William's denunciation was heard around the world, and he never looked back. That same year, he and his mother fled to America. Once there, William took the unthinkable step. He enlisted in the US Navy to fight against Nazi Germany. It was both a personal and political rejection of his uncle. Adolf, infuriated, reportedly referred to him as his loathsome nephew. William served honorably as a hospital corpsman from 1944 to 1945. After the war, he made the final cut, legally changing his surname first to Hiller, then to Stuart Houston, erasing Hitler forever. Life in America was quiet. William settled in Patchogue, Long Island, married a German-American woman named Phyllis Jean-Jacques, and had 4 sons, Alexander, Louis, Howard, and Brian. They lived behind trimmed hedges and white fences, neighbors unaware of the history locked inside their house. The sons avoided the spotlight entirely. Not one of them had children. And when Howard, the only one who married, died in a car crash in 1989, that decision became final. The Stuart-Houston line, the only living male descendants of the Hitler bloodline, ended silently in suburban New York. Heinz Hitler. William's story was mirrored, almost tragically, in the fate of his half-brother Heinz Hitler, born in 1920 to Alois Jr. and Hedwig Friedel. Unlike William, Heinz was a devoted Nazi from an early age. He attended an elite Paula school, groomed to be one of the Reich's future leaders. Reports suggest Adolf took a special interest in Heinz, perhaps seeing in him a more loyal reflection of the family name. But loyalty did not protect him. Heinz enlisted in the Wehrmacht and served as a radio operator on the Eastern Front, deep in the chaos of Operation Barbarossa. There, in the freezing snows outside Moscow, his unit was overrun by Soviet forces. Captured on January 10, 1942, he was imprisoned in Butyrka prison, one of the most notorious facilities in Moscow. What happened next remains murky. Some say he was tortured, others that he died of disease. Official Soviet records simply list his death as February 21, 1942. Heinz Hitler was just 21. He left no children, no widow, no memorial. He was a boy who died for an ideology that consumed him, remembered only in footnotes and prisoner rolls. One by one, the extended branches of the Hitler family withered, some by war, some by obscurity, some by their own design. Whether by shame or silence, they erased themselves, renouncing the name, refusing to reproduce, or being buried anonymously. What might have been a lasting dynasty crumbled instead into dust and forgotten graves. The Raubal side, Angela's children. Even after Adolf Hitler severed ties with most of his family, there was one branch he kept close for a time: the children of his beloved half-sister Angela Hitler, known as the Raubal side of the family. Angela had 3 children from her marriage to civil servant Leo Raubal Sr., Geli, Leo Jr., and Elfriede. Of these, one would come to haunt Hitler's life forever, and the others would drift quietly into history. Geli Raubal. Among all of Hitler's relatives, none captured public fascination or tragic speculation like Angela Maria Geli Raubal. Born in 1908, Geli was Adolf's favorite niece, and by the mid-1920s she had become more than just family. She was his obsession. In 1925, at just 17 years old, Geli and her mother Angela moved into Hitler's Munich apartment on Prinzregentenplatz. From that moment, the young woman's life was no longer her own. Hitler, then rising fast in political circles, kept Geli on an unnervingly tight leash. He dictated what she wore, forbade her from dating, and controlled her social circle with the precision of a prison warden. Even university studies in Vienna were curtailed when he decided it was unsafe for her to be too far from his reach. Visitors to the apartment noted how Geli's bright-spirited demeanor began to fade under Adolf's suffocating control. Whispers spread. Was she merely a ward, or something more? Historians still debate the nature of their relationship. Some suggest Hitler harbored incestuous feelings. Others describe Geli as a naive girl, caught in the twisted psychology of a man obsessed with control and purity. Whatever the truth, their bond was undeniably intense, possessive, and ultimately destructive. In September 1931, Geli was found dead in Hitler's apartment, a bullet wound through her chest. The Walter pistol that fired the shot had belonged to Adolf himself. She was just 23 years old. The official verdict was suicide. Yet from the start, rumors of foul play haunted the case. Some claimed she had tried to flee Hitler's control. Others whispered of a pregnancy, either by a forbidden lover or by Hitler himself. A few even hinted that Hitler's inner circle had helped cover up the truth to protect his political future. What is certain is this: Geli's death shattered Adolf. For days, he reportedly locked himself in a room, refusing food or visitors. He kept a portrait of her with him for the rest of his life. Geli Raubal left behind no diary, no children, no final words, only unanswered questions. Her death became the great phantom of Hitler's personal life, a tragedy he never publicly addressed. Though she had no offspring, her name lives on in conspiracy and speculation, a reminder that even in his private world, Hitler left behind only sorrow and silence. The Raubal bloodline, too, would soon dwindle. But Geli's story stands apart. The niece who might have escaped, the girl whose life was written and erased within the walls of her uncle's home. Leo Raubal Jr. If Geli Raubal was the niece whose tragic death haunted Hitler's private world, her brother Leo Rudolf Raubal Jr. was the nephew who came closest to being part of Adolf's inner circle, at least for a time. Born in 1906, Leo bore a striking resemblance to his infamous uncle. Tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing features and Aryan coloring that would have fit perfectly into Nazi propaganda. Hitler took a particular liking to him, often inviting Leo to dine at the Berghof, his mountain retreat in the Bavarian Alps. Unlike others in the family, Leo was treated almost like a member of Hitler's extended household, though always at arm's length. One dinner guest recalled that Hitler affectionately referred to Leo as mein Neffe in front of party members. But that favor did not spare him from war. In October 1939, as World War II exploded across Europe, Leo was drafted into the Luftwaffe's engineering corps. Despite his family ties, Leo was no desk officer. He served in the brutal cauldron of the Eastern Front, where Hitler's ambitions turned cities to ash and cost millions of lives. In January 1943, Leo was seriously wounded at Stalingrad, one of the bloodiest battles in history. When the shattered remnants of the German Sixth Army surrendered on January 31st, Leo was among the prisoners taken by Soviet forces. News of his capture reached Hitler swiftly. In an uncharacteristic show of personal vulnerability, the Führer tried to intervene. He proposed a prisoner exchange, even offering to release Yakov Djugashvili, Stalin's own son, in return for Leo. But Stalin's response was cold and final. War is war. There would be no mercy, not even for family. And so Leo Raubal vanished into the grim oblivion of Soviet captivity. He would spend 12 long years in prison camps, a forgotten prisoner of a war that had already claimed the rest of his family. It wasn't until September 28, 1955, after intense negotiations between East and West, that Leo was finally released. When he returned to Austria, Leo quietly resumed life as a chemistry teacher and engineer. No public interviews, no memoirs. He had seen too much, and perhaps lost too much. He married Edith, a fellow schoolteacher, and together they had a son, Peter Raubal, born in 1931. They lived in Linz, not far from where Hitler had spent his boyhood. Leo passed away while on a holiday in Spain in 1977, far from the shadows of Stalingrad, and was buried without fanfare in Linz. His son Peter, now an engineer himself, chose a quiet life too. Like so many of Hitler's descendants, Peter never married, never had children, and never spoke publicly of his infamous family line. The Raubal branch, like the rest of the Hitler bloodline, was fading into silence. Elfriede Raubal. The youngest of Angela's children, Elfriede Maria Raubal, lived a life almost entirely apart from the maelstrom of her family's notoriety. Born in 1910, Elfriede kept to the background, deliberately it seems. While her siblings were drawn into Hitler's gravitational pull, Elfriede quietly carved out her own path. In 1937, she married Ernst Hochegger, a respected law professor, and settled into domestic life in the Salzburg and Linz regions. There were no headlines, no rumors, no party connections, just a quiet existence lived in the margins of history. It was a choice, perhaps, or perhaps a gift of circumstance. During the war years, Elfriede avoided the spotlight entirely. Unlike Geli, Leo, or even her mother Angela, Elfriede never appears in Hitler's memoirs or letters, nor was she photographed alongside party leaders. She had 2 children, including a son, Heiner Hochegger, born in the final winter of the war, January 1945, just months before the Third Reich collapsed in flames. Elfriede lived a long life, passing away on September 24, 1993, at the age of 83. She died in obscurity, far from the scrutiny that followed other members of her family. Her son, Heiner, too, chose privacy over public discourse. He never had children, ensuring once again that the Hitler bloodline continued to shrink, withered not by fate, but by deliberate choice. Living descendants and the end of the bloodline. And so it comes to this. 5 men, scattered across Europe and America, represent the final threads of Adolf Hitler's bloodline. No heirs, no children, no future lineage. Among them is Peter Raubal, born in 1931, the only son of Leo Raubal Jr. Peter grew up in post-war Linz, the same city where Hitler had spent his youth. But unlike his infamous great-uncle, Peter chose a life away from ideology and notoriety. He became an engineer, lived quietly, and eventually retired into near anonymity. Despite carrying the family name, albeit through his mother's side, Peter never married and never had children. He rarely speaks to the press, avoids public appearances, and has declined all interviews since the 2000s. His silence is complete. Today, he lives a private, reclusive life in Linz, the last Raubal to bear any trace of the Hitler legacy. Likewise, Heiner Hochegger, born in the chaotic final months of the Third Reich in January 1945, grew up in the Salzburg region as the son of Elfriede Raubal. Unlike his cousin Peter, Heiner has lived his life entirely outside any media spotlight. He never held political views publicly, never gave statements, never published a memoir. His life has been as quiet as it is opaque. Like Peter, Heiner never married and had no children. Whatever knowledge or personal history he carries will die with him, another silent branch of the tree trimmed by time. On the other side of the Atlantic live the final 3 men of the Stuart Houston family, the American descendants of William Patrick Hitler, Adolf's English-born nephew who fought against the Nazis in the US Navy. William's 4 sons, Alexander, Louis, Howard, and Brian, were all born and raised in suburban Long Island, New York. They changed their name in 1947 to Stuart Houston in a symbolic break from their past, burying the Hitler name once and for all. But the ghosts never quite left them. Howard, the 3rd brother, was the only one who ever married. But even that thread was brief. He died in a car accident in 1989 with no children. The surviving brothers, Alexander, Louis, and Brian, are now in their 70s, living simple, unassuming lives on Long Island. Alexander, the eldest and most visible, ran a landscaping business for years. Though intensely private, he once gave a rare and brief interview to the Times of Israel in 2018. When asked about the legend of a Hitler family pact to end the bloodline, he laughed and called it bullshit. Yet his next words revealed the truth beneath the myth. The weight of the name. We just didn't want to pass that to anyone else. He recounted how one of his brothers had become engaged to a Jewish woman, only for the engagement to end the moment she discovered who he was. The name Hitler, even decades after the war, still held the power to destroy love, trust, and ordinary dreams. The origin of the pact story traces back to journalist David Gardner, who, in the 1990s, spent years tracking down Hitler's living relatives. Gardner claimed that the surviving men, Peter, Heine, and the Stuart Houston brothers, had spoken privately and come to a quiet, mutual understanding. A pact wasn't signed, but it was discussed among them, and it was decided that none would marry and no children would be had. That unspoken agreement was made, and it was kept. Whether a formal agreement ever existed doesn't really matter. The result speaks for itself. All 5 men, the last bearers of Hitler's blood, have chosen not to pass it on. Today, they live far from the eyes of the world. Peter and Heine remain in Austria, while the Stuart Houston brothers still live in New York, in a modest neighborhood surrounded by trees and anonymity. No public legacy, no memoirs, no children. In the words of the Times of Israel, the Hitler family line has come to a natural end. No bombs, no assassins, no trials, just silence, solitude, and a quiet decision to end a legacy that had drowned the 20th century in blood. The Hitler name, once shouted in fire and fury across the world, will vanish from this earth, not with a bang, but with the quiet refusal to continue. Conclusion: the bloodline ends. By the dawn of the 1960s, Adolf Hitler's personal family had all but disappeared. The once bitter roots of his bloodline had not been severed by war or vengeance, but withered by silence, shame, and quiet resolve. His younger half-sister Angela, once the closest relative to share his domestic life, died quietly in 1949, estranged and forgotten by the regime she had once helped sustain. She left no children to carry the Hitler name. His full sister Paula, the last to legally bear the surname Hitler, died alone in a Salzburg apartment in 1960, without issue, without memoir, without even a headstone bearing her full name. With her death, the last direct family link to Adolf Hitler vanished from public sight. His elder half-brother Alois Jr., after years of estrangement, passed away in 1956 under an assumed name, buried without ceremony in Hamburg's Ohlsdorf cemetery, his grave untended and long forgotten. His son, Heinz, who had sworn loyalty to the Nazi cause, perished in a Soviet prison at just 21 years old. The other son, William Patrick, once Hitler's ambitious British-American nephew, became the most defiant of them all. He fled the Reich, fought against Hitler in the US Navy, changed his name to Stuart Houston, and raised 4 sons in New York. And yet, despite surviving and thriving in the American post-war landscape, none of his sons had children. The line stopped there. From the Raubal side, Angela's children, the result was the same. Geli, the beloved and controversial niece, died in 1931, her death still wrapped in mystery and pain. Leo Jr., captured in Stalingrad and imprisoned by the Soviets, returned to Austria a broken man, fathering only one son, Peter, who never married. Elfriede, the quietest of them all, bore a single son, Heine, born in the final gasps of the Third Reich. He too would grow old without heirs. Across the generations, no great scandal silenced the Hitler line. No assassinations, no state-sanctioned sterilizations, no judicial verdicts. Only a deep, unspoken understanding that to carry on the name was to carry an unbearable burden. Journalist David Gardner, who spent years tracing the last surviving relatives, described it as a conscious erasure. It was not brought about by a single act, but by quiet decisions made gradually over decades. To remain private, to remain childless, to let it all end. And it did end. No other family in the 20th century bore such historical weight, nor chose with such resolve to step out of history's glare and vanish. The name that once stood at the center of world catastrophe will now appear only in books, plaques, and museum labels. It will not live in blood. In the final bitter twist of history, The man who preached the supremacy of lineage, blood, and racial legacy, who saw himself as the founder of a 1,000-year Reich, has left no one to carry his name, his face, or his DNA into the future. The Hitler line ends not with fire but with silence, not with legacy, but with chosen oblivion.